The Sinai and Palestine Campaign of the Middle Eastern theatre of World War I was fought between the British Empire and the Ottoman Empire, supported by the German Empire. It started with an Ottoman attempt at raiding the Suez Canal in 1915, and ended with the Armistice of Mudros in 1918, leading to the cession of Ottoman Syria and Palestine. Fighting began in January 1915, when a German-led Ottoman force invaded the Sinai Peninsula, then part of the British Protectorate of Egypt, to unsuccessfully raid the Suez Canal. After the Gallipoli campaign, veterans from each side formed the Egyptian Expeditionary Force and the Fourth Army in Palestine, to fight for the Sinai Peninsula in 1916. During this campaign, the Anzac Mounted Division and the 52nd Division succeeded in pushing German-led Ottoman army units out of the area, beginning with the Battle of Romani and pursuit in August, the Battle of Magdaba in December, and in January 1917 the newly formed Desert Column completed the recapture of the Sinai at the Battle of Rafah. These three victories, resulting in the recapture of substantial Egyptian territory, were followed in March and April by two EEF defeats on Ottoman Empire territory at the First and Second Battles of Gaza in southern Palestine. After a period of stalemate in southern Palestine from April to October 1917, General Edmund Allenby captured Beersheba, defended by the Third Corps. Having weakened the Ottoman defenses, which had stretched almost continually from Gaza to Beersheba, they were finally captured by the 8th of November, after the Battle of Tel el-Kuwaif, the Battle of Ha'ira and Sharia, and the Third Battle of Gaza, when the pursuit began. During the subsequent operations, about 50 miles of formerly Ottoman territory was captured as a result of the EEF victories at the Battle of Moga Ridge, fought between 10 and the 14th of November, and the Battle of Jerusalem, fought between the 17th of November and the 30th of December. Serious losses on the Western Front in March 1918 during Erich Ludendorff's German Spring Offensive forced the British Empire to send reinforcements from the EEF. During this time, two unsuccessful attacks were made to capture Amman and to capture Es-Salt in March and April 1918, before Allenby's force resumed the offensive during the maneuver warfare of the Battle of Megiddo. The successful infantry battles at Tulkarm and Tabzor created gaps in the Ottoman front line, allowing the pursuing Desert Mounted Corps to encircle the infantry fighting in the Judean hills and fight the Battle of Nazareth and Battle of Samak, capturing a fuller basin, Jenin and Tiberias. In the process, the EEF destroyed three Ottoman armies during the Battle of Sharon, the Battle of Nablus, and the Third Transjordan attack, capturing thousands of prisoners and large quantities of equipment. Damascus and Aleppo were captured during the subsequent pursuit, before the Ottoman Empire agreed to the Armistice of Mudros on the 30th of October 1918. Ending the Sinai and Palestine Campaign, the British Mandate of Palestine, and the French Mandate for Syria and Lebanon were created to administer the captured territories. The campaign was generally not well known or understood during the war. The English people thought of it as a minor operation, a waste of precious resources which would be better spent on the Western Front, while the peoples of India were more interested in the Mesopotamian campaign and the occupation of Baghdad. Australia did not have a war correspondent in the area until Captain Frank Hurley, the first Australian official photographer, arrived in August 1917 after visiting the Western Front. Henry Gullett, the first official war correspondent, arrived in November 1917. The long-lasting effect of this campaign was the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire. when France won the mandate for Syria and Lebanon, while the British Empire won the mandates for Mesopotamia and Palestine. The Republic of Turkey came into existence in 1923 after the Turkish War of Independence ended the Ottoman Empire. The European mandates ended with the formation of the Kingdom of Iraq in 1932, a Lebanese Republic in 1943, the State of Israel in 1948, the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan in 1946, and the Syrian Arab Republic in 1946. Background: by 1914, Egypt had been part of the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, remaining under nominal Ottoman suzerainty despite being occupied by the British in 1882, following the Anglo-Egyptian War, eventually becoming a British protectorate. The Suez Canal was of vital strategic importance to the British, reducing the sailing time from India, New Zealand and Australia to Europe. As a result, Egypt became a major base during the war, particularly during the Gallipoli campaign. To Germany and the Ottoman Empire, the canal was the closest and weakest link in British communications. Defense of the canal posed a number of problems, with its sheer size alone making it hard to control. There was no road from Cairo, while only one railway track crossed the 30 miles of desert from Cairo to Ismailia on the canal before branching north to Port Said and south to Suez. Control of the central area around Ismailia was of great strategic importance because these three canal towns relied on fresh water from the Nile, via the Sweetwater Canal to the main gates and sluices near there. At the beginning of hostilities between Britain and the Ottoman Empire in November 1914, a 30,000-strong British defence force evacuated the Sinai Peninsula. Instead, they concentrated their defences on the western side of the canal. The British force comprised the 10th and 11th Indian Divisions, the Imperial Service Cavalry Brigade, the Bikana Camel Corps, 3 batteries of Indian Mountain Artillery and 1 Egyptian artillery battery. These were supported by the guns of Allied ships in the canal. Opposing them were around 25,000 men, including the 25th Division. The Ottoman Empire demonstrated its interest in being reinstated in Egypt in 1915 when Ottoman forces attacked British forces in Egypt. The Germans also helped to foment unrest among the Senussi in what is now Libya, when they attacked western Egypt and threatened the Sudan during the Sinai Campaign. Egypt's contribution to the war effort. Egypt was neither an independent ally nor a member of the British Empire and as such held a unique position amongst the belligerents. The recently appointed High Commissioner Sir Reginald Wingate and Murray agreed that Egypt's contributions would be restricted to the use of the country's railway and Egyptian personnel. However, Maxwell had proclaimed on 6 November 1914 that Egypt would not be required to aid Britain's war effort. Martial law allowed the British administration to control foreign European residents, monitor foreign agents and intern dangerous persons who were the subjects of hostile nations. The powers were also used to police prostitution and the sale of alcohol. The capitulations, however, provided some protection to the Europeans who controlled both these industries. In the autumn of 1917, GHQ was transferred from Cairo to the front, leaving garrison battalions. This move took the commander-in-chief of the EEF, who was responsible for martial law, out of touch with the civil authorities, and unrest in Egypt became serious during the winter of 1917-18. By 1917, 15,000 Egyptian volunteers were serving in the Egyptian army, deployed mainly in the Sudan with 3 battalions in the EEF, along with 98,000 laborers, 23,000 of whom were serving overseas. The number of Egyptian enlistments could not be increased as conscription could threaten the production of much-needed food and cotton, and the stability of Egypt. Also by this time, much of the railway lines in Egypt that were not crucial to the production of cotton, sugar, cereals and forages, had already been lifted and used on the military railway, except the Khedivial Railway from Alexandria to Dabar, which was available for emergencies. The Egyptian Labor Corps and the Egyptian Camel Transport Corps had performed invaluable service during the Sinai Campaign and would perform even greater service and hardships during the coming Palestine Campaign. As the war dragged on and the fighting moved beyond the Egyptian border, many Egyptians felt the war no longer concerned them. At the same time, the increasing need for Egyptian personnel turned volunteers into forced labor, although highly paid, in a system controlled by the local mudirs. Defense of the Suez Canal. From the 26th of January to the 4th of February 1915, the Suez Canal was attacked by a large force of the Ottoman army. Beginning on 26 and the 27th of January, two smaller flanking columns of the Ottoman army made secondary attacks near Kantara in the northern sector of the canal and near Suez in the south. These were followed by the main attacks on 3 and 4 February, on the Suez Canal to east of the Suez to Kantara Railway. Kress von Kressenstein's Ottoman Suez Expeditionary Force advanced from southern Palestine to arrive on the canal on the 2nd of February, when they succeeded in crossing the canal near Ismailia on the morning of the 3rd of February 1915. Only 2 Ottoman companies successfully crossed the canal, the rest of the advance party abandoning attempts to cross as a result of the strong British defence by 30,000 men of the Imperial Service Cavalry Brigade and the Bikana Camel Corps, supported by Egyptian Army and Indian Mountain Artillery. The British then amassed troops at the scene, which made another crossing impossible. The Ottoman companies held their positions until the evening of the 3rd of February 1915, when the commanding officer ordered them to withdraw. The retreat proceeded, or orderly, first into a camp 10 km east of Ismailia. Subsequently, Ottoman advance troops and outposts were maintained on the Sinai Peninsula on a line between El Arish and Nek, with forces at Gaza and Beersheba. During the next few months, Kress von Kressenstein commanded mobile units and launched a series of raids and attacks in an attempt to disrupt traffic on the Suez Canal. Colonel Kress von Kressenstein did all he could to keep the British occupied, launching an attack on the 8th of April 1915 when a mine was placed in the Suez Canal, which was located and disabled by a patrol, and between 5 and the 13th of May 1915 he personally led a charge. During the Gallipoli campaign, these tactics were abandoned. Von Kressenstein also demanded German special forces, which were promised to arrive in February 1916, to prepare another expedition against the canal. He moved to the headquarters of the 4th Army in Ain Sofa in August, then to the new headquarters in Jerusalem, and waited for the German specialists. However, the Ottoman line of communication was extended towards Egypt, with the completion of the 100-mile section of the Ottoman Railway to Beersheba, which was opened on the 17th of October 1915. British defences extended. Von Kressenstein's raids confirmed the impracticality, identified by Lord Kitchener, Secretary of State for War, in November 1914, of defending the Suez Canal from the western side. Near the end of 1915, with the Gallipoli campaign drawing to an end, Cabinet authorized new positions to be established in the desert about 11,000 yards east of the canal, strengthening defense of the canal against long-range guns, and agreed to provide additional troops. Port Said became headquarters of these new defenses, with an advanced headquarters at Kantara. The defenses were organized into three sectors. Number 1. Suez to Cabrit HQ Suez 9th Corps. Number 2. Cabrit to Ferden HQ Ismailia 1st Anzac Corps. Number 3. Ferden to Port Said 15th Corps. At the end of 1915, General Sir John Maxwell, with headquarters at Cairo, had responsibility for troops in the Egyptian Delta, the Western Desert and the Sudan, and administered martial law over the whole region including the Suez Canal. The British War Office was controlled the Levant base, which was responsible for administering British Empire forces in Salonika, Gallipoli, Mesopotamia and India, and had its headquarters at Alexandria. The retreating forces on Gallipoli and divisions from the United Kingdom formed the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force commanded by Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Murray, with headquarters at Ismailia. After the evacuation from Gallipoli, the total British force in Egypt was nearly 400,000 men in 13 infantry and mounted divisions, a force regarded as the strategic reserve for the whole empire. In March 1916, Sir Archibald Murray took command of all these forces, which were united into the new Egyptian Expeditionary Force. Murray believed a British advance into the Sinai to occupy Katia Kashmir would be more cost-effective than the static defences recently established. The War Office agreed to this, but not to his more ambitious plan to advance to the Ottoman border. He believed that the area captured in an advance to El Arish or Rafah could be held with fewer troops than would be needed for a passive defense of the Suez Canal. Murray had estimated a force of 250,000 could cross the Sinai and that 80,000 troops could be maintained in the Katia area. If such a large Ottoman force were to reach Katia, then the British would need a very large force to defend the Suez Canal. British occupation of the Oasis area, which stretched eastwards from Romani and Katia to Bir el Abd along the ancient Silk Road, would deny drinking water to any Ottoman invasion force. Murray planned a 50,000-strong garrison in the Katia area and obtained authority to build a pipeline to pump fresh Nile water and a railway to transport the infantry divisions and the supplies. He also decided to empty the water cisterns at Moya Harab so the central Sinai route could not again be used by Ottoman columns advancing from Palestine, and to maintain some troops at Suez to defend the town. These operations began in February 1916 when construction started on the 25-mile stretch of 4-foot 8-inch standard-gauge Sinai Railway and water pipeline from Kantara to Katia. By the end of March or early in April, 16 miles of track, including sidings, had been laid. Raid on Jaffa, the intact water cistern and wells on the central road across Sinai still enabled Ottoman army forces to threaten the canal at any time. Between 11 and 15 April 25 Bakana Camel Corps, 10 engineers with 12 men from 8th Light Horse Regiment and 117 men from 9th Light Horse Regiment, with 127 Egyptian Camel Transport Corps, traveled 52 miles to destroy a well-boring plant (GYNS) erected on the wells, the water wells and pumping equipment at Jaffa. They captured an Austrian engineer officer and 33 men, 4 of whom were wounded, and killed 6 Ottoman soldiers. On 9 June 1916, units from No. 2 section of the canal defences formed the Mukhshib Column, consisting of part of the 3rd Light Horse Brigade, 900 camels, non-fighting units and camel transport escorted by 1 squadron of 9th Light Horse Regiment and 10 Bakana Camel Corps. The engineers drained pools and cisterns of 5 million gallons of water in the Wadi Mukhshib. sealed the cisterns to prevent them refilling during next season's rains, and returned on the 14th of June. At the same time, a detachment of Middlesex yeomanry advanced to Moria Harab. With the central Sinai route now denied to them, Ottoman forces could only advance towards the Suez Canal along the northern coast. Occupation of Romani. Von Kressenstein launched a surprise attack on Easter Sunday, also St. George's Day, the 23rd of April 1916, east of the canal and north of Elfurden Station. The Yeomanry 5th Mounted Brigade were guarding the water pipeline and railway being built out into the desert towards Romani. While the three regiments were widely dispersed, squadrons were surprised and overwhelmed at Katia and Ofratina east of Romani, suffering the loss of about 2 squadrons. Fighting for the oases area during a raid on Katia and Ogratine demonstrated its importance to both sides. From a base in the oases, a large number of Ottoman troops could threaten the Suez Canal and control the Sinai Peninsula with the threat of a flank attack. The Australian 2nd Light Horse Brigade and New Zealand Mounted Rifles Brigades of Major General Harry Chauvel's Australian and New Zealand Mounted Division were ordered to occupy the Romani area the day after the fighting at Katia and Ogratina. Here, 23 miles from Kantara, they aggressively patrolled and reconnoitred the area. The Australian 1st Light Horse Brigade arrived at Romani on the 28th of May 1916. Until the railway and water pipeline to Pelusium Station and Romani were built, all water, food, shelters, other equipment and ammunition had to be carried to this position by the Egyptian Camel Transport Corps, with flies attracted to horse litter, etc. Provision of safe sanitation was a constant battle. Incinerators were constructed to burn refuse by stacking used bully beef tins filled with sand. During this period, men had to patrol constantly despite poor diet, severe weather conditions, little shelter from the sun, and very few rest periods. April 1916. Everything is being hurried up. The big English flying school near our camp has been ordered to turn out as many pilots as quickly as possible, and there is an average of 18 planes in the air all day long, just over our heads. The din is indescribable, but the horses never look up or otherwise take the slightest notice of the planes. The life of a pilot, computed in flying hours, is pitifully short. Many of them are killed while learning. My wife is working as voluntary aide at a hospital in Ismailia, and she and her associates are constantly making shrouds for these boys that have perhaps made one little mistake in the first solo flight, and have paid for it with their lives. The army will do anything in reason for these youngsters. We are ordered to let them have riding horses, and we occasionally turn out quite a creditable hunt with Saluki hounds after jackals. During May 1916, Ottoman aircraft flew over the Suez Canal dropping bombs on Port Said, which caused 23 casualties. On the 18th of May, the Ottoman-occupied town and aerodrome at El Arish was bombed by order of Colonel W. G.H. Salmond, commander of the 5th Wing, in reprisal for the first Ottoman raids, and on the 22nd of May the Royal Flying Corps bombed all camps on a 45-mile front parallel to the canal. By the middle of May the railway had been completed to Romani, making it possible to bring up enough stores and equipment to deploy the 52nd Division there. As soon as they arrived, they began to dig trenches in the sand, creating a defensive line with redoubts from Mahemdia near the Mediterranean coast, south to Katubgan at a high point in front of Romani. Ottoman army units retaliated to the increased British Empire presence at the beginning of June, with the first of many air raids on Romani, killing 8 troopers from the 1st Light Horse Brigade and wounding 22. About 100 horses were also lost. At this time the forward Ottoman air base was at Bir el Mazar, 42 miles east of Romani. Early reconnaissances by the Anzac Mounted Division covered considerable distances from Romani as far as Ogratina to Bir el Abd and Bir Bayud. The longest raid was made by the New Zealand Mounted Rifle Brigade to Salmanah, covering 100 kilometers in 36 hours. After the middle of May, and in particular from mid-June to the end of July, the heat in the Sinai Desert ranged from extreme to fierce. Even worse were the camps and dust storms, which blew once every 50 days for a few hours or several days, turning the atmosphere into a haze of floating sand particles flung about by a hot southerly wind. The troops and their commanders, unused to the conditions, suffered considerably from heat stroke and thirst during these early patrols. One such patrol, returning during the hottest part of the day after a sleepless night far from base and very little water, suffered casualties of 160 men who collapsed from heat exhaustion. An important innovation in the getting of water, which enabled the mounted units to operate more effectively over wide areas of rocky desert areas and sand dunes on reconnaissance, was the spear point, developed by Australian engineers, designed to be attached to a pump. A 2.5-inch pipe was pointed, perforated and covered with a sheet of fine perforated brass. This was driven down into the water area by means of a small pulley bar and monkey, or by a sledgehammer, and additional lengths of pipe were added if necessary. The ordinary general service lift and force pump was then attached. This arrangement proved so efficient that spear points were issued to every squadron in the division, and the troops carried a number of them. Our men were thus enabled to get water at any of the hods in the desert in a very short space of time. Once the brackish water was found, a medical officer assessed it as either drinking water, horse water not fit for horses, and signs were erected. In June, the 1st Light Horse Brigade carried out reconnaissances to Bir Bayud, Sajia and Ogratina, to Bir el Abd, Hod el Jaila, Hod el Da'unan and Hod el Mushalfat. Another routine reconnaissance by 2nd Light Horse Brigade took place on the 9th of July to El Salmanah. Just 10 days later, El Salmanah was occupied by Ottoman army units as they concentrated for the Battle of Romani. In the middle of June, the No. 1 Squadron, Australian Flying Corps, began active service with B Flight at Suez, doing reconnaissance work, and on the 9th of July, A Flight was stationed at Sharaka in Upper Egypt with C Flight based at Kantara. Battle of Romani. The Battle of Romani took place near the Egyptian town of the name, 23 miles east of the Suez Canal. From shortly after midnight on 3/4 August until the invading force retired during the late morning and afternoon of the 5th of August, the Central Powers force of Austrians, Germans and Ottomans, led by Kress von Kressenstein, sought to stop the British Empire reclaiming the Egyptian territory of the Sinai Peninsula and cut the Suez Canal by bringing it within artillery range. It numbered 12,000, mainly from the 3rd Infantry Division, with Bedouin irregulars, German machine gunners and Austrian artillery from Pasha I. Romani was defended by the 52nd Division, and the 1st and 2nd Light Horse Brigades. The canal was defended by the 5th Mounted, the New Zealand Mounted Rifles Brigades and the 5th Light Horse Regiment. Sustained fighting began in the early hours, and by about 11 o'clock on the 4th of August, the Austrian, German and Ottoman force had pushed the two Australian brigades back to a point where the 52nd Division in the trenches were able to attack the attackers' right flank, and the New Zealand Mounted Rifle and 5th Mounted Brigades arrived in time to extend the Australian Light Horses line. The Ottoman advance was stopped by the combined Allied fire from the infantry and mounted troops, deep sand, the midsummer midday heat and thirst. In midsummer desert conditions, the British infantry were unable to move effectively to pursuit the retreating columns the next day, and alone, the Anzac Mounted Division was unable to attack and capture von Kressenstein's large force, which made an orderly retreat to Katia and eventually back to the base at Bir El Abd. Bir El Abd was abandoned on 12 August 1916 after fierce fighting, during an attack by the Anzac Mounted Division on 9 August, at the extremity of British Empire lines of communication. This was the first substantial Allied victory against the Ottoman Empire in World War I, ending the defense of the Suez Canal campaign. The canal was never again threatened by land forces during the remainder of the war. The Allies then went on the offensive for 7 months, pushing the Ottoman army back across the Sinai Peninsula, fighting the battles of Magdaba and Rafah before being stopped on Ottoman soil in southern Palestine at the First Battle of Gaza in March 1917.